Let's go ahead and pick up where we left off here. We were going through this example. So we had a squared quantity equal a number. So on page 1 of this packet, we learned whenever that's the case, you square root both sides, jump down and add a plus or minus. So the square root of anything squared just pops out. 2 of something pops out as 1. Square root of 81 is 9. Square root of 16 is 4. And we need to solve for x, so I added 5/4 to both sides right at the end of the video. So this is what the problem now looks like. 5/4, because this is going to cancel, plus or minus square root of 81, 9, square root of 16, 4. And then remember how I showed you to write your two cases? 5 plus 9 divided by 4, and 5 minus 9 divided by 4. So this is 14 over 4, which simplifies to 7/2, and this is negative 4 over 4, which simplifies to negative 1. So my two solutions are 7/2 and negative 1, and that makes sense because this guaranteed that I would have two solutions. So that's like as hard as they get. And that one wasn't that bad, right? As you get practicing, they'll get easier and easier. But this is probably the one most like the test, so let's go ahead and work on this one. And then I'll let you do 5. You can turn off the video and try 5 on your own first. Okay, so step 1 is make sure the leading coefficient's 1. It is, so that's done. And we're just following the steps here. Divide to make the leading coefficient 1. We don't need to because it's already 1. Step 2, variables on one side, everything else on the other. So here's a variable, here's a variable. This needs to move over. So subtract 32, subtract 32. So remember how I told you to write it with a blank? So write x squared minus 12x plus blank equals negative 32 plus blank. And on the test, if you looked at your practice test, I don't know how many of you have printed that yet, but it asks you for certain methods. And after your test, I'm going to make you all scan your work and turn it into me in Canvas. So you need to make sure, because even if you get the answer right, if you didn't do it with that method, you lose half credit. I think you actually lose 3 out of 5 points, because that's what we're testing on is method. So you need to know these methods by their name. When you see square root property, you go, oh, bring that over, and then square root both sides. When you see completing the square, you know to bring that over and do x squared minus 14x plus blank equal negative 44 plus blank. When you see quadratic formula, that's what we're going to learn on tomorrow's lesson. You use x equals opposite of b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, which we'll learn tomorrow. So you have to use the method they say. So if you get the answer right on Connect and you scan your homework and you didn't use the right method, you lose 3 of the 5 points. So make sure you follow what the test says. Whatever method it says to use, that's the method you must use, because as a teacher, I have to show that all my students know the competencies. So if you did all these one way, I haven't showed you learn the competencies. What are you going to do in the next class when they make you find the center of a circle and you don't know how to complete the square? So make sure when you do these on the test, follow the method they say. So you do need to know the methods by their names. This one's called completing the square, where we're making, and it's easy to remember because you're making a perfect square trinomial. So the name is there. So make a perfect square trinomial. So that's what those directions say. And then remember the last step is always square root property. So constant over to the right. Now we're doing exactly what we did on page 2. Remember how it said find in? That's what we're doing now. So let's go up here and do it. So half of negative 12 and then square it. So remember, this is half of b squared. So half of negative 12 is negative 6. Squared is positive 36. And remember how I said every single time you square something, it'll be positive. That's why I have the 2 plus signs there. So the 2 plus signs mean the answer is going to be positive, which it is. So in a different color, let's add those 2 in. And remember, whatever you do to the left side of an equation, you have to do to the right side too. So make sure you add that to both sides. So this is what we just worked on the last page, how to factor that. So factors of 36 that add to 12 are 6 and 6, sign same, both negative. So this would be x minus 6, x minus 6. Or we could do that little shortcut. Square root of x squared is x. Bring down the sign. Square root of 36 is 6. And then remember how I said we always want to write it like this? Because our next step, look on your notes, apply the square root property. So we need a squared quantity to apply the square root property. So 36 minus 32, 4. So doesn't that look just like the problems we did on the front page? It looks almost identical to this one. So we have a squared quantity, we brought the number over, and then we have a perfect square over there. So we're going to follow those steps. So squared quantity tells me to take the square root. But whenever I take the square root, that says don't forget to add the plus or minus. So I'm going to put it right there, right now, so I don't forget. So these undo each other. 2 of something comes out as a single. So x minus 6 is outside. Square root of 4 plus or minus 2. And then remember when we did this on the front page, I said write your 2 scenarios. X minus 6 equals positive 2 or x minus 6 equals negative 2. Add 6, and we get x equals 8. Or add 6, x equals 4. 6 minus 2 is 4. So my 2 solutions are 4 and 8. See, not so bad, right? But that is one of the most missed on the test. And I think most of it is because we don't do too much of this again in this chapter. So we have it in this one section. And we do a tiny bit towards the end, but not much. So I think most of the reason it's the most missed is just because students don't go back and look. So that's why you want to make sure you have it highlighted and make sure when you're doing the practice test that you do the method it says. Okay, so why don't you close the video down, work on number 5, and then come back and we'll check 5 together. Okay, leading coefficients 1. So that means step 1's already done. Step 2 is move all constants to the right. So I have x squared plus 3x. That means add 9. So then I do plus blank equals 0 plus 9. Oh, I don't know why I just did that. 9 plus blank. We don't need to write 0 plus 9. Duh, that's 9, obviously. So x squared plus 3x, when we add 9, that goes away. Remember, and it opens up a blank. Over here we have 9 plus blank. Now we're ready to complete the square, which is what we did on page 2. So we do half of b squared. So in this case, b is what? 3. And remember how I said when we did this on page 2, use your calculator because you want a fraction here and here. So don't want a decimal. So we have parentheses, 1 fraction bar 2 times 3, close the parentheses, and then hit your x squared, which is right here below the caret. And that leaves us with 2 1/4. But we don't want a mixed number. So we do second fraction key, and that changes it to improper, 9/4. So that's the number we're going to add to both sides. 9/4 over here and 9/4 over here. Remember, whatever you do to the left side, you have to do the exact same thing to the right side. So this side we're going to have to factor, but let's do it on the next step. So we'll just leave it as is right now. And on this side, we're going to use the calculator again to add. So 0 plus 9 plus 9 fraction bar 4. And remember, we want the number as an improper fraction, not a mixed number. How are you going to take the square root of 11 and 1/4? But if you do second fraction key, it'll turn it to improper. Now I can take the square root. 45 is 2 9s and a 5. Square root of 4 is 2. So we'll use all the methods from our last chapter to do square roots. So a lot of the stuff from the last chapter is in this. Imaginary numbers, doing square roots, simplifying square roots, so on. Okay, so now the third step is factor the resulting perfect square trinomial. So we just made this a perfect square by doing half of that squared. So now we need to do our cute little shorty cut for factoring. Remember, we take the square root of this, we use this sign, and we take the square root of this. So that's going to leave us with x plus square root of 9 is 3, square root of 4 is 2 squared, because it would have been x plus 3 halves, x plus 3 halves. We just saved a step. So now, doesn't this look like what we did on the front page? Remember when we had didn't we have one with fractions? Oh, I guess not. Oh, we did on the second page. So now it kind of looks like this, where we have to do the fraction part. But the nice thing is we have the calculator, so it doesn't matter really how ugly it gets, because calculator helps us do everything. So I have the squared quantity equals a number. I'm going to slide this up just a little bit. So to undo the squared quantity, remember we square root, and we immediately go over and add plus or minus so we don't forget. Anytime you square root both sides, that just has to be a habit. Oh, I just drew a square root twice. Plus or minus. That's from here on out, you have to do that. So these two undo each other. That's the reason we did the square root, is to get that out. 2 of something comes out as a single. So we have x plus 3 halves equals plus or minus. Nothing's common here, so we learned in the last chapter when nothing is common to split them up. You guys remember that from the division section? So then we're going to take the square root of each one separately. Well, the denominator just comes out as 2, right? The numerator is 9 times 5, which is 2 3s and a 5. So that is what? 3 rad 5? So now our new problem is x plus 3 halves equals plus or minus, don't lose that, 3 rad 5 over 2. Okay, so you can should we go up to the top of the paper? There's some room up there because I don't want to get down here any lower. So let's transfer this way up to the top so we can work it. Okay, so I just took an arrow and I'm moving it up to the top of the paper. So x plus 3 halves equals plus or minus 3 radical 5 over 2. Equals, what was it? Plus or minus 3 rad 5 over 2. Okay, so here we are.